disabled and elderly. Key negatives that could come with autonomous vehicle technologies are an increase to vehicle miles traveled, also referred to as VMT, potential increase to urban sprawl, and potential job losses. So we recognize that with all these complex issues that autonomous vehicles can very and will likely transform mobility as we know it. Not overnight, but within the next years, over the next years. So MBTA last May, the Executive Committee adopted legislative and policy considerations to encourage the safe and equitable accommodation of autonomous vehicles. And for this evening's discussion, I want to give an overview of what I mean by autonomous vehicles. This is not an evening to talk about the technical aspects of autonomous vehicles, but broadly speaking, they fall into 6 levels of driving automation. Levels 0, 1, and 2 are when the human driver uses the steering wheel and is monitoring the driving environment. Levels 3, 4, and 5 is when the automated driving takes over. So these legislative and policy considerations that I'm going over this evening are going to be addressing levels 3, 4, and 5, which is not here yet, but is predicted to be here within the city talk to, but for this evening's conversation, I'll say within the next several years. So the intent of these legislative and policy considerations is to encourage safe and equitable accommodation of autonomous vehicles on the roadway network. And they aim to support regulations and planning that will ensure safe, accessible, and equitable mobility for all citizens. So when pursuing these considerations, this will allow MAPC to advance the goals outlined in our regional plan, which is Metro Boston, making a greater Boston region. The considerations are intended to encourage the development of autonomous vehicles and also support innovation, but also be an advocacy will be guided by the legislative and policy considerations of which you all have, or should have a copy with you. And as you can see, they're pretty meaty. It's 11 pages. It's divided into 2 categories. The first key category are legislative considerations, which I'll go over. The intent of tonight's conversation is, it was, I'll be honest, a little difficult to pull all the complexities in this from this 11-page document into a PowerPoint presentation. So I've highlighted the key elements for each of the legislative and policy considerations, and I'm going to go through. And then after I do that, my hope is we can have a lively conversation, questions and answers, to talk about anything I have discussed, and as well take a look at the document for diving into further details. So with the legislative considerations, there are 9 categories or topics. The first is data collection and data sharing, potential changes to municipal and state revenue, public infrastructure, safety and consistency, shared use mobility model, speed limits, testing activities, vehicle miles traveled, and zero emissions vehicles. So with data collection and sharing, the key elements are that there needs to be in the future and moving forward a standardized strategy that collects, monitors, stores, and shares data. However, at the same time, it's important that there be data privacy and security for both drivers and passengers. And there should be performance measures such as vehicle occupancy, travel times, and shared versus non-shared service. Also, it is forecast that there could be potential changes to municipal and state revenue. So MAPC encourages local and state governments to develop an economic planning framework that identifies the impacts that autonomous vehicles may have in the future. One example would be moving forward, autonomous vehicles will not be violating traffic laws as much, so that will result in a decline of revenue for tickets. That's one example. The next topic is public infrastructure. MAPC supports public and private sector collaboration, efforts that will both invest in and install the new infrastructure requirements autonomous vehicles will bring. And these are 4 examples here, such as developing robust wireless communications networks, improving roadway maintenance programs, the potential to look at reducing travel lanes on public roads and making more space available for pedestrians and bicyclists, and perhaps considering special lanes in the future for autonomous vehicles, or certifying roads for either driverless or manual operations. So as you can see, this document is really trying to look into the future and look at all different types of scenarios that might come out. This is a shared use mobility model. MAPC strongly encourages the application of shared use mobility models, which means incentives for shared rides or shared ownership of autonomous vehicles, as well as integration with public transportation. An example would be first mile, last mile. And in turn, this would decrease vehicle miles traveled. The next topic is safety and consistency. We encourage a flexible and non-restrictive regulatory and legislative approach, but also support regulatory measures that enforce, for example, enforce laws on speed limits, texting, drunk driving, and seatbelt use, limit distracted driving, promote uniform legislation, regulations, and operations, as well as follow US DOT's federal automated vehicles policy. Speed limits is supporting strategic flexibility regarding designation of speed limits. In the future, there may be vehicles that travel slower or faster. And right now, MAPC's position is that we should be open-minded and be flexible with this regard to speed limits. There are testing activities, and as you probably know, there are testing activities taking place in the city of, in Four-Point Channel area with Nutonomy and another firm called Optimus Ride. MAPC encourages testing activities as well as pilot projects, and also supports Mass DOT's process to test these vehicles. With regard to vehicle miles traveled, MAPC endorses various types of VMT and dynamic road pricing plans designed to incentivize ride sharing and also as well as discourage private car ownership, as well as vehicles operating without drivers and passengers. One thing people might have heard of through other discussions on this topic or through reading articles is the fear of what people sometimes refer to as zombie cars, where you would drive to, an individual who owns an autonomous vehicle would drive to a restaurant, and rather than finding a parking space, would designate that vehicle to circle around the block while they're enjoying dinner. They're enjoying dinner, but the people on the street who are also in their cars are not enjoying that added aspect of traffic. So that's one consideration. And this last one here is zero emissions vehicles, or referred to as ZEV. And this is developing policies that maximize the number of autonomous vehicles that are ZEVs, as well as incentivize their use. It is not an assumption or a given that in the future autonomous vehicles will be electric vehicles. The technologies for both are evolving, but they are not on the same track. So this consideration, legislative consideration, is that as autonomous vehicles come out to the market, there should be policies in place that maximize that they be zero emissions vehicles, or one example of which is electric. So that's the first half with the legislative considerations. The policy considerations are 12, and they are autonomous delivery of goods, education, equity, land use, long-range goals, long-range planning and modeling, parking, public transportation, tracking and monitoring federal and state developments, a transition period, truck freight and delivery systems, as well, and the 12th is workforce impacts. So autonomous delivery of goods is that MAPC supports the following measures: the safe, efficient, and environmentally sustainable deliveries. Deliveries should not interfere with vehicles, public transit, pedestrians, and bicycles. Integrating a complete streets design. Creating e-commerce friendly streets with sidewalks and curb ramps. Education, supporting extensive public education as well as targeting specific ages and constituencies. Equity, autonomous vehicles should be designed to incorporate, enhance, and support the mobility needs of all demographics. Land use, supporting land use policies that discourage sprawl and encourage high-density, walkable communities. Long-range goals means encouraging the public sector agencies and municipalities to evaluate how autonomous vehicles can advance long-range goals, such as Vision Zero, greenhouse gas reductions, as well as improved congestion management. Another policy consideration is long-range planning and modeling, which is incorporating the potential impacts of autonomous vehicles into metropolitan planning organizations' planning process. Parking, supporting policies that minimize the amount of land dedicated to parking and repurposing on and off-street parking for other land uses, open space, and bicycle lanes. One of the, a strong positive that autonomous vehicles can bring is that they will be able to park in more compactly. So that will in turn allow for additional space, and MAPC's policy is that that space should be looked at for land uses, open space, and bicycle lanes, with that as a priority. The next is public transportation. MAPC supports services that complement and supplement public transportation, that leverage private mobility companies to fill in transit gaps and improve access to public transportation that is cost-effective and on-demand, and public transportation that's competitively priced, reliable, convenient as a service. Also, there are autonomous technologies that public transit fleets can use to leverage and enhance their services. And the last four considerations are tracking and monitoring federal and state developments. This is a moving target, so it's also a strong consideration that the agencies stay informed of existing and developing state and federal policies, legislation, and programs. And also a transition period that is anticipated not to be 1 or 2 years. It could be a long window of time. And as autonomous vehicles start to penetrate the market, to look at initially limiting them in areas restricted for low speed or in designated areas. Also, autonomous vehicle technology is very strong in the truck freight and delivery systems. MAPC supports safe, efficient, and environmentally sustainable freight and delivery systems that promote consolidating shipments, deliveries during non-peak hours, and also in the future designating autonomous truck routes. And the last consideration is workforce impacts. It is anticipated that there will be job disruption, particularly to the trucking and delivery industries. So with that, knowing that ahead of time, it's important to plan for and educate for future training needs. And the last item, which is covered up by the chairs, is stating that the new career opportunities and training programs should be accessible for all. So that is our very autonomous vehicle policy and legislative considerations, which is very broad and complex, in a consolidated PowerPoint. I know I've only touched upon the key highlights, so there's a lot more substance to this document, but I wanted for this evening to really pull out the key elements and then open this up for any comments or questions, and I'm happy to continue the conversation.
So I have a question.
Sure.
It seems like in this particular area, autonomous vehicles are something that the car companies are working on, that the car companies will eventually introduce, that will be this improvement that they offer to their customers. From all this work that you've done, from everything that I've read, it sounds like it'll be a huge safety improvement as well, because human drivers are notoriously unsafe. Driving is one of the major causes of death before age 45, actually the single biggest. Why isn't the government and the planning people and everyone else, why aren't they taking the lead in saying there is potential for this technology to be used to improve safety? What parts of it can we pull out before we reach, level 5 and everything is magic and cars don't have steering wheels? What parts of it can we pull out to improve the safety of cars that already exist? As an analogy, in the railroad field, a lot of these improvements on the way to full automation were in fact pushed by the government, pushed by regulators for things like initially, various vigilance controls, automatic train stops, positive train control, which you may have heard of. Why is there no effort to do something similar for cars?
Yeah, I would say that with regard to safety and the how that's unfolding, that's primarily going through the federal side, not as much the state side. And there are federal agencies like NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration, which is tasked with this. So there is a lot of activity in that area, but that's, I would say, mostly federally focused. And how that's translating to the state side, it's really more, I would say, incremental and being vetted out on the federal side. There was a recent document that you might be aware of that Federal Department of FHWA recently put out. Actually it was in December of last year, that outlines the safety and the policy and guidelines with regard to safety. But I think that it's such a complex topic, and that there are so many areas that, what does safety mean? It's something that that's taking place more on the federal level, that's being vetted out on that side. Examples of safety, or I would say with level 0, 1, 2, and 3, one example would be cruise control or lane assist driving. That's already happening today, and by the time that actually can be in a vehicle and available for public purchase, that gets vetted out through through federal regulations and on the federal side. The state is more in a reactionary mode on that. So where this document focuses is more on the legislation and policy, but we fully support safety, and we say safety first.
Okay, so is it just a matter of the safety regulations being mostly on the federal level, which is why that's where that happens? I mean,
well, I would say, when I say on the federal level, it's more with how the vehicle is built and constructed prior. On the state level, it's more with the regulations on the roadway, and that's very new and being in early days.
So like as a concrete example, we have cruise control, adaptive cruise control. We also have apps on our phones like Waze that will, if you look at it, will tell you the speed limit on any given road that you're on at any given time. What's stopping the state from mandating that new cars should have this technology built in, and that the cruise control system will automatically prevent the car from exceeding the speed limit for the road that it's on.
Yeah, I would say at this point, with the mechanics of the vehicle and having all that technology in place, is something that the manufacturers are working on, and is also at a very high cost and is still being processed. That's how I would say when I say safety for that question, is more with the mechanics of the vehicle. Safety in these guidelines pertains more to the roadway regulations and also the integration of this type of technology, which will be with manual driving and with an environment that is more complex compared to a railroad, which is on a set track alone. You know, it's in a much more complex environment. So when you say safety, there are many elements to that. So in a nutshell, I would say the mechanics of the cars themselves, the regulations, the criteria, that's more on the federal side, safety in terms of integrating with the environment, safety, miles per hour, how that integrates in the urban or suburban environment, that is still being vetted out and in very early days of thinking about how that gets incorporated.
So I can go?
Yeah.
So I'm interested more so in what MAPC is doing with respect to the formulation of policy and legislation, and so to that end, what are you planning to do with respect to the next cycle of UP Unified Planning Work Program studies and the long range transportation plan? Because the studies from the UPWP will feed into that LRTP, and I'm a little bit concerned that we might miss our opportunity to really provide meaningful information into the next LRTP, because I think that cycle begins next in 2019. And so studies that we propose for the UPWP starting this cycle are studies that would start in fall of 2018 and get finished in 2019, just as we're starting to try to start the LRTP. And so do you have any studies or recommendations for studies for the next cycle?
Well, actually, currently, the Central Transportation Planning staff and CTPS is actively involved in a study and looking at the impacts of autonomous vehicles and how that could translate to the long-range impacts and the long-range transportation LRTP, long-range transportation plan, because in turn, what that translates into recommendations for future funding. So there are some technical studies. There's one technical study that's underway. I believe the first phase should be finished by this winter. That is looking at the modeling, which means that we're looking at different scenarios with autonomous vehicle penetration, meaning a lot of low impact, medium impact, high impact, and then how that translates into potential roadway impact. And in turn, that translates into recommendations for future funding. So they are in the early stages of how the onset of autonomous vehicles could impact the roadway network. So they're involved with them. And I believe, I did read their scope of work, and as part of that scope of work, they are going to have a public meeting, and that should be, I don't know when, but that's part of the scope of work that will take place as part of that project. So there will be an opportunity for people to learn more and participate.
Right, so that's coming out of the UPWP for the previous year. I'm really getting at me.
Yeah.
So what ideas do you have for the next cycle of UPWP studies?
Well, actually, it's a two-part. So
Okay.
it's the first part is going to be winding down this year, and then the second phase to that is going to be continued.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Sorry, I was late. So I have a question about where you look besides federal, and specifically for two reasons. One, California seems to have most of the very large software companies, and those large software companies seem to be getting interested in these kinds of technologies. Secondly, transportation conformity rests in part on the Clean Air Act, and under the Clean Air Act, California has autonomy to determine its own vehicle regulations, and we often opt in. There's an opt-in in the Clean Air Act that allows other states who wish to follow the California program rather than the federal program.
Right.
So have you been at MBTA kind of tracking what's going on in California? And have you thought about, specifically with regard to environmental impacts, the fact that bifurcation continues with California having option to kind of drive its own future and to bring other states along with it, as opposed to under the federal umbrella?
Yeah, we're actively looking at both, and that's something we're very mindful of. Definitely with the research we've done, California, and when I say research, there are nationwide a lot of pilots taking place, but as far as the legislation, California is definitely a leader. However, with the way that this document is worded, was also very careful with in terms of considerations for policy and legislation, because there's also a concern that setting regulations and restrictions before or prior could be constraining.
Right.
And California has actually encountered that, I believe, there was a braking issue or legislation where they kind of were jumping the gun, and they had initiated some regulation and then pertaining to braking that later, I don't want to say haunted them, but it was constraining.
Yeah.
So this document is mindful in the sense that we should be aware, but also not jump the gun and legislate or put in policies in place just to say we have it done, because there are still many unknowns and uncertainties. So at this point, it's important to be flexible and not paint yourself in a corner, or to say this is what legislation is moving forward, because it might come back in the future to be constraining.
Yeah. And then one follow-up, if I could, and this may not be your area, so if it isn't, don't worry about it. Conformity originally meant, and still means to a degree, conformity with the Clean Air Act. And I'm wondering if global is the only environmental scale to which attention is given on these issues of autonomous vehicles, or the intersection of autonomous and electric vehicles. It can be problematic, just in my opinion, to look at one scale outside of the context of kind of all scales, from complete streets on the small end, where you might have exposures to global on the other end, and regional in between. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say that the thinking in creating this document was more looking nationally or region-wide, not as much on a global level, but really tracking the industry and what the changes are. I don't know if that's a good answer, but I would say mostly it was looking at the region as a whole.
Right, which is what the MPO does, what MPC does.
And then looking at what other states are doing in terms of their considerations for policies, legislation, as well as pilot projects. So really keeping a close watch nationwide with what's taking place,
right.
as well as Europe and Asia, and Australia to some extent.
Great, thanks very much.
Sure.
Karen?
Oh yeah, I was actually thinking of where to start from, aside from the legal thing. I'm thinking like the shuttle buses at UMass, just have, they have one, pick up at one place, you drop off another, and maybe some of the shuttle buses in Masco. I would actually like to see more emphasis on public transit, because there would be no incentive for the vehicle to then wander around waiting for somebody to finish their dinner or something. There would be a lot more control. So I don't know, that's probably on a more microscopic level.
Well, that really touches upon the shared use mobility, or looking at shuttles. In the industry, there are really two key tracks. Like, one is the privately owned vehicle, your own personal vehicle, and then there's a shared use model, which you just mentioned, which is multiple users using a shuttle and then maximizing the efficiency of that vehicle rather than having one passenger or one driver in one vehicle. In the future, most likely it will be a combination of both, but there are the two drivers, no pun intended, the private side with the own vehicle for the individual, and then the shared use model. Right now, in the industry, the emphasis is on the single occupancy vehicle, but MAPC is very strong in supporting the shared use model and looking at how that public-private connection can be made to be complementary and not competitive. There have been some pilots underway. I know the MBTA has looked at, or is in the midst of a paratransit pilot where they have contracted with Uber, I believe, to supplement the rides.
But I wouldn't want a handicapped person to be on a driverless vehicle. I mean, they should get sick or something.
So thinking forward, the shared use mobility is something that MAPC is going to be emphasizing and looking more towards. And then as you saw with the other considerations, that it should be available and accessible to all demographics.
Yeah, the thing is with, you know, my bag is environmental justice, and I just see you know, if you've got a lot of money and you can have it and you can have that convenience, it's going to be pressure to, and the people that don't have the money. So I actually think I would like to see more emphasis on shuttles, some of the MBTA routes supplementing them. Don't fire the drivers of the regular, but supplement the one bus that goes down. Gosh, if they could run a few more of those, maybe don't stop at every stop. I don't know. It could be a nightmare in terms of once it gets going and accepted, it could be all of a sudden you have a million of these, not a million, but a lot of these cars in Weston. They're coming in to go at Boston, and they don't mind paying a lot of bucks for parking or pay the ticket. Anyway, I think there's a lot there. I would really like to see it controlled somehow. And if it works out, absolutely fine. But once you let the genie out of the bottle, you're not going to be able to put it back in.
Yeah, and that's a good point when you said, you know, not letting the genie out of the bottle yet. Right now, we are at very early days of this, that it's very preliminary and very early, and it's very, MAPC recognizes the importance of that and the importance to lay out the policies and the thinking that you had just mentioned early on, and be more in a proactive position rather than reactive position. And so this document is a look at doing that without locking in and actually putting regulations and policies in place, but more to consider and get the thinking going.
Well, this is a political, I mean, it's up to congressmen and state reps, it's up to them to get involved with this.
Correct.
We did have a state rep come from the western part of the state, and her, because they have such poor, non-existent, virtually public transit, it would be good to have it there. So, I don't know. I mean,
So-
you guys are thinking about it all the time, I'm not.
No, but like you mentioned, this starts the thinking, and this is the framework to start the thinking from. So as scenarios come up, like you had mentioned, the Weston scenario, or an increase in suburban vehicles coming from the suburbs, when there are discussions about that, these legislative and policy considerations, the intent is to help serve as a foundation for that, and to look at the guidance and give feedback. Same thing is with the potential legislation that's bills are currently being filed that touch upon these topics to varying degrees. So as different agencies and individuals start vetting that out and thinking about what the contents of these bills are or these scenarios are, these legislative and policy considerations that I've just presented is really an intent to help educate and give, to look at these new transportation issues from different angles.
Are you guys going to the polls with this stuff?
It's on our website, and we will actually be presenting it next month at the at MassDOT's autonomous vehicle working group on September.
Oh, but I'm
19th.
thinking a different, I'm thinking of state reps, the
That's
House,
the thinking.
you know.
Eventually, as the opportunity presents itself, we will be promoting it and letting people know about it as questions arise. Actually, just before I left, there was an email from the town of Arlington who's interested in having an autonomous vehicle workshop, and they
Good.
asked MAPC to participate. So
I bet you Lenny has something to do.
Well, I mean, I've been talking with them about
That's
that.
okay, that's okay.
And so it's good to hear that something's coming out of that, because and kind of along those lines. I'm gonna dovetail with your question, Kara. I hope if not, I apologize. But to that end, I mean, because you mentioned, like, I think on page 8 of page 6, section 6, about education, and then how the government entities should educate the public. But I think a lot of times you can make that statement, but the leaders kind of still need guidance from the policy experts. I think they probably look to MAPC for expertise on how to educate their citizens, because it's not so much that we want to try to brainwash people into accepting AVs, as much as it is to get out there, discuss, hear what their concerns are, because I think if people get to voice their concerns, first, we will learn something, you will learn something, and secondly, people feel as if it's part of the process. They won't feel as if this technology is voiceable at them. So are there any plans to help local officials with the education process?
I would say, just with the Arlington example, is an email that came in, but as with that inquiry, but as MAPC gets involved, we will be asking who will be at this meeting, who are you inviting, how are you inviting them? So that's the beginnings of making sure that all demographics, to the extent possible, depending on the scenario situation, are included.
Yeah. Yep. I'm glad that you mentioned the shared use versus single ownership, because I've got a bunch of questions and maybe even like a hypothesis about that. I didn't see in the document anything that specifically talked to integration or not integration as much as supplementing MBTA fixed route service other than the first mile, last mile. And I wanted to press a little bit on that. Can you see what would you think of a model where someone who's a private owner of an AV could effectively opt into, say, a shared pool of AVs that the MBTA or any transit agency could then, say, on demand, put into use for a particular congestion point of a fixed route, or if a disabled vehicle could suddenly then result in a swarm of AVs that would then sort of be the equivalent of a shuttle bus replacement for point A to point B, a portion of the line. And as sort of a corollary to that, would you want that to enforce a multiple passenger situation? So if you had a 5-seater level 5 AV, would you only say reimburse? Would you recommend, say, the transit agency reimburse the single owner of that AV only if there were 4 more people in it, as opposed to just one person, which would just be adding congestion, that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. It's a very complicated question.
Yep.
The thinking, though, is to, and that can actually translate to encouraging people. It's almost, it aligns with congestion pricing or taxing for vehicle miles traveled, that to avoid single occupancy vehicle travel and encourage multi-passengers in one vehicle, you would have incentives and disincentives. And one example of that that's already taking place is with Uber and Lyft, that you can use Uber Pool or Lyft Line, that you would pay a less expensive rate if you decide to share your ride with someone, a stranger, but your route you're taking, getting from point A to point B might take longer for you, but you would be willing to pay less. So I think that this also touches upon the integration of public-private relationships, and also the importance of, in order for that to be effective, to be sharing for both public and private entities, to be sharing the data that is collected in order in the future to make it the most efficient and effective as possible. But I think that moving forward, complementing private and public is most important, and not making them competitive.
Okay.
And eventually the technology will be there to make it, the scenarios that you were just talking about, like fleets of, could be more complex patterns, potentially feasible. And we're seeing that in the early days with Uber and Lyft with their sharing option.
Right. In a typical shared use environment, I mean, when you talk about shared use, is that a corporate ownership of a fleet, or could it be just a bunch of people in a neighborhood who all happen to have AVs that are compatible, who all say, hey, let's start a pool of our own? I mean, or is it somewhere in between?
It's actually somewhere in between, because that's already happening today with Maven. That's one example. If you own your car and you want to, say you work 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, and you want to earn a little more additional revenue, you can lease your car out to individuals. That's one option. There's also car companies are looking more closely at that as well. There's BMW has a program. The name escapes me right now, but basically, if you are a BMW owner, you can share your BMW with other owners of BMW. So it's like a shared club, so to speak, of one type of ownership or sharing.
Now, I don't understand how that works. I mean, if everybody has a BMW, why would you want to use your neighbor's?
Well, if you're traveling, or if, say your car is, you own one vehicle, but you don't own a second vehicle, and say your significant other is using it, and you would like to use a vehicle.
So it's to add.
It does exist, but they're different business models. That's one example. Maven is another example where it doesn't depend on the type of vehicle, but rather you can go online and select vehicle from where you are and what type of vehicle you're interested in. So there's a lot, different scenarios or business models are coming up, and they might, I think it will be to be seen in the future, you know, what might be successful in a suburban environment compared to an urban environment, compared to a rural environment. So there are different models, business models coming up, and MAPC is keeping an eye on all of them, most of them to the extent we can. So that's the thinking is just be open-minded, see how this evolves, but also see how this evolves and guide it in such a way that it's not towards single occupancy vehicle ownership, but more for multiple users or multiple riders in one vehicle, whether that be a car or a shuttle.
I'm glad you mentioned Maven because I'd heard about it a while ago and I'd forgotten all about it. In an attempt to sort of, again, incentivize people to contribute what might be a single owner AV into a pool that could be, I guess, that could be then used for public transit sort of substitution. Can you see could you imagine legislation being put forward that would insist upon, say, taking care of interior problems? You know, say to somebody who's normally taking the green line, who can't take the green line because there's a broken down train, whatever. A fleet of AVs that are Category 5 get dispatched. The AV is full of 5 people and somebody spills their coffee or food or whatever. Do you think there's a place for legislation to allow for either a charge back of that cleaning from the single owner back to the agency, or for the rider to contribute to it?
I think
or
we're getting like way
too down in the
deep
weeds?
into
Yeah.
a very specific scenario and
That's
a
fine.
very specific vision of what this will look like. So
Yeah.
one thing I'd like to point out is that in all this discussion, and
It's fine, yeah.
95% of discussion of everything said about autonomous vehicles, vehicle is a euphemism and it means car. Like, we talk about vehicle, you mean cars. You
No,
mean,
don't you mean buses also?
It could be.
if you read this, it reads like
The
95%
emphasis is
of it is
on
about cars.
the vehicle, but also there's this emphasis that there should be sharing of that vehicle, and also complementing public transit, and then also leveraging the technologies that autonomous vehicles bring, and incorporating that into the public transit technology, into that arena with public transit. So I think another area to be mindful of moving forward, and that's not addressed in this document outright, but what you were talking about is like looking at and using different modes or different options. Is that there's a strong thinking in the industry that moving forward there will be subscription services. So just as you have an MBTA card, that's, you know, for subway pass or zone 1, 2, or 3, it would be more elaborate. It could be like depending on your needs. So if you say you take Ubers a lot or Lyfts, you would have revenue on that card for those types of rides. Then you would have MBTA, and then you would have private. So the thinking is that there would be a subscription service that would be tailored to the individual's needs, and then how frequently they would be using transit or other services like Zipcar. So it's more kind of bringing it together collectively. So I think that touches on your comment about the options to use different types of transportation modes, that rather than thinking of them in separate
Actually,
categories.
on that note, the MBTA, as some of you may know, sends out periodic surveys of riders. I don't know how you sign up for it, but you probably should. one of the things on a recent survey was, oh, what other modes do you take? What other modes do you
Right.
use to make this trip, etc. So that's definitely an important thing to be thinking about, and I'm glad you guys are doing it.
So a lot of private car companies and technology companies, in some cases both working together, seem to be far ahead of where the legislation is for this.
Yes.
Do you have any concern that there's going to be hiccups along the way where legislators start reacting to some of it happens and then they kind of not only stagnate the private side of development, but kind of push down the line in public acceptance of like automated buses or something like that?
Yeah, I think there's a very strong chance that there will be a lot of pressure there will be a lot of pressure for legislation to happen right away, quickly, and I think that it's important to think holistically and think of the different. This topic is so complex. It's not just. It has many sides, and this document helps outline that. So in looking at what's most important is not to be. It's a delicate balance, not to be proactive and not reactive. So I think that and it's also, in addition, very difficult to forecast what might be presented or what situations or scenarios might arise. So with that in mind, it's important to be open-minded, flexible, but not reactive at the same time. And I hope that answered your question. Okay.
I wanted to ask about zero-emission vehicles, because in the document, I believe all of the references to emissions are either in terms of zero
Yes.
or not a zero-emission vehicle.
Yes.
Do you have any sense of whether or not these partial zero emissions or hybrids which are lower would be either incentivized, disincentivized, etc.?
Yeah, that's when we were putting the considerations together, there was a lot of toing and froing on this. So we came up. First, it was electric, and then it was taken out. Then we put in zero emissions, and then we put in hybrid. But eventually, the consensus was let's do zero emissions vehicles because electric is one type of. It falls into the category of zero emissions vehicles. It could be hybrid, could fall into that category as well as other fuels, alternative fuels that vehicles can use. So rather than pointing to one technology, there's a reason why it's zero emission vehicle. So that has the whole picture. The concern is that rather than the regulations, setting that aside, is the assumption that as autonomous vehicle technology advances, that it will be in tandem with electric vehicles, and that's or hybrid, but that is not necessarily the case. They're happening in tandem, but in separate tracks. So taking a step back, there's a consideration here to say it's very important to incentivize and keep that, and ensure to the fullest extent possible that as new vehicle autonomous technologies come out to the market and are available, that they be zero emission vehicles. But to your question about to what level and what types of emissions, we're not there yet in terms of vetting out the details of that.
Do you think that people should be strongly disincentivized from buying an AV, even if it's a sort of standard emission?
I would say that's a very political. That's getting because that can be very it's not just, is it good for the environment or not good for the environment, but it can be a very political issue as well. So right now, if the considerations are saying, look, AVs, there should also be should be ZEBs. And it's not hand in hand that that's how they will evolve in the future, but we want to guide it in that direction. And then moving forward, as MBPC and other transportation agencies and authorities start looking at the details of the exact technology or the type of emission or the type of fuel that's being used, then that will be vetted out in the details. But this is more of a bird's eye view saying, look, it's not they could go on different tracks, but right now this is saying they should be in tandem. Yes?
I just want to throw 3 comments out there based on what other folks around the table have been talking about. So for Stefan, one of the people who's been thinking a lot about shared economies and transportation is Robin Chase, who founded Zipcar. Now sometimes she's right, sometimes she's wrong, but she's always kind of churning that. And currently she's doing a lot of thinking about shared, private shared economies, including transportation. For Karen, there's an old model, and Arcady and others probably know a lot more about this than I do, but the colectivos in second and third world countries exist to serve the EJ population who can't afford the single occupancy vehicles, and in some cases they're very efficient. They're basically van-based systems that individual entrepreneurs or people who have maybe more than one of those provide. But if you go somewhere like Mexico City or Nairobi or something like that, they dominate.
You mean tap-taps?
I'm sorry?
I think those small jitney buses that are
colorful.
colorful.
They're like jitneys.
Oh,
They're
they're all over South America.
Yeah, right.
Haiti.
So they're an example of that
But
scale.
they're not autonomous.
Well, they could be autonomous.
Well,
But the autonomous is a separate feature, but it could be knit together with that.
well,
So even though we've not been very good at that here.
no, but I think Katie was pointing out that so far it's just cars. It's not buses, it's
Right.
not jitneys. So
Right, and we're just one country, but there's a lot of other places that have.
no, but they're not
transportation
autonomous.
systems. But
Nothing, what he's trying to, in his solution, we're gonna combine the two, the mass transit, even though we don't have those today,
But
autonomous.
they brought that point up before about buses and shuttle buses, but I think, as Katie pointed out, the conversation now is only about cars.
Yeah, that's fine, but that's in a limited area of conversation. I just wanted to make that clear.
No, I realize, and I would love to have that conversation, but MAPC is not having that
And
conversation.
then thirdly, James is not here right now, but he focused a lot on climate. And if folks read the 2-page release on Massachusetts climate action and progress, we've made pretty good progress on sourcing energy and power, and we've made reasonable progress with land uses. Buildings are by far the smallest generator of greenhouse gases by sector, and we've done nothing on transportation. We're pathetic on our climate progress with transportation.
And to add to that, it's 40% of emissions.
Yeah, it zoomed past power and electric generation as the dominant sector, and that trend is going to continue. And we're hampered by our scale, I'm afraid. California has in-state scale to deal with things like that and integrate science into their engagement with the transportation sector. We don't have that here. We have small numbers of people trying as hard as they can to keep up with regulations and trends, which I appreciate. But it just points out how much of a laggard transportation systems are, specifically here. So I just wanted to throw that out.
I think there is a lot to learn from pilots happening in other areas and what's taking place, but I will say that within the past few months, the other hat I wear at MAPC is I do development review and looking at large-scale development projects that go through the MBTA process. And there are 2 development projects where there is interest in having an autonomous shuttle. Granted, it's not going to be on the street network, but it would rather be serving within the site. One is Union Point, and the other is 1265 Main Street, which is the former Polaroid facility, which they have their own campuses, but there has been interest expressed to look at operating autonomous shuttles as a pilot or for the employees at that site, and that already is underway in California at an office park, which brings in the San Francisco metro area, bringing an autonomous shuttle, bringing employees from the train station to the office park. But also to touch on the EJ population, there is also another study or pilot taking place in the Los Angeles metro area for electric vehicles, where they are both charging stations and the vehicles are being made available in EJ areas in the city, and seeing how right now that's in early days of that pilot. But we're watching that closely to see how that what lessons are learned from that. But again, a lot of this is I wouldn't say forecasting, but it is projecting. Looking at different scenarios, educating and being proactive, because there are many scenarios that can come up. There are also scenarios that are potentially unanticipated. But this is really a document to lay the foundation and to start the thinking and education for looking at the early days, like what's happening, and then also how can that be applied here. So again, there's no silver bullet, but it's rather thinking and educating and being proactive.
Sorry,
Sure.
to the Polaroid buildings might be which Polaroid building?
This is 1265 Main Street in Waltham. It's
Waltham,
the
okay.
Polaroid building.
Okay.
The big fan. Everything's about you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, because I'm moving into the old Polaroid building with my entire department, but that's the one on Memorial Drive. Yeah, I got my hopes up.
Yeah, the Clark's headquarters.
Waltham Polaroid, okay.
You're not getting on top of the shuttle, I'm sorry.
Well, I heard,
Milwaukee from Central Square.
But there's been interest. Again, it's not
Yeah.
a short thing of will
I gotcha.
happen, but it's in the MIPA submissions, it's been mentioned, in the meetings, there's an interest and there's thinking. So, but again, these are closed campuses, not dealing with the complexities of I'll say the roadway ecosystem, which is
right.
very unpredictable, or can be.
All right, well, thank you
Well,
for
okay.
coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have one last thing?
I got one last thing.
One last thing.
For the first time in reading your document, I read the issue raised about city infrastructure to support e-commerce, particularly
Yes.
deliveries. That took me by complete surprise. Can you talk a little bit more about what you
Sure.
think might, well, particularly I'm interested in who would end up needing to pay, for example, if there's going to be an autonomous delivery and there needs to be a ramp or a curb cut, that kind of thing. I mean, any thoughts on that specifically?
Sure. So I'll first tell you the genesis of that. So
Yeah.
this went through many drafts,
Mhm.
and the legislative committee reviewed this. And actually, this topic was brought up at the city of Somerville, and they said, "You don't have this in here. This is an issue that could come up in the future." And I started doing more research on it, and I'm sure everyone's heard about drones, where you see that in the media a lot. But there's also thinking that, or there are technologies where there could be ground deliveries, and going from the truck or the van into the building. And there are ways that the building can be designed in order to make that more efficient and that being more efficient translates on the delivery side. That's more efficient, which then translates into less traffic. And when I was doing this research, I came across a study that a planner did for one apartment building in New York City. And he must have had a lot of interns or a lot of volunteers, but basically they, for a week, watched all the deliveries that were coming and going into this one apartment building, and it was just, and they have pictures of all the delivery packages and all the clutter, and that translates to inefficiencies on the roadway network, where that can be consolidated, and that can be, the building can be designed to have a ramp or systems where the delivery can happen quickly and easily, and also streamlined, so you don't have multiple deliveries, but you can have fewer deliveries. And also, as I mentioned during the presentation, during times of the day that are not peak hours. So basically, the study was just all over the map, literally with deliveries happening all the time throughout the day, and then it showed that there's a real need to, in New York City, this is what's happening in one building, it can be assumed it's happening in the other building, so there's a real opportunity to streamline that. And also, not just with the concept of drones is out there, but there's also an on-ground delivery service as well. And about half a year, I attended a meeting, or it was a day workshop hosted at Fort Plain Channel by Mass TLC. I have to, the acronym, I forget but it was a technology session, and they had a woman there who had it was a wheel, and it was called the Gita, and it was actually produced by Vespa, and essentially it follows you if you wear a belt, and you do your grocery shopping, you carry items, and you put it in this, and it comes in different colors, and you can have yellow, blue, you can light up or not light up, but basically it's like a pet that follows you. During her presentation, she was operating it with a remote control, and it was full of candy. So everybody was helping themselves, but if you think about this, if there's one person with one Gita device, what if there are 300 people doing this in downtown Crossing? There really needs to be a forward thinking and a monitoring and being mindful of different scenarios and how to best manage the goods. That falls in the category of goods delivery.
Okay.
So thanks to Somerville, that's been incorporated.
Excellent. Thank you,
Some
Somerville.
people pulling their suitcases behind them, almost tripped over those.
Wow.
And it's put up by Vespa, so if it's not like like a pie in the sky Jetsons type of technology, it is available, and if you Google it, you can see videos.
I'll put a couple of links onto the mailing list for the group. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I'll be in touch.
Thank you for having me. Okay, sounds good. I'm just going to grab my flash drive. I'll email you the PowerPoint as well, and we'll put it up on our website as well, so you can share that with the group. Okay,
Maybe
thank
see
you
you
again.
around soon.
Okay, we look forward to coming back.
Alright. Next, we have minutes, which were just sent out
Today.
today.
Is everyone done with the projector? Is there another thing for anybody's report?
As far as I
I think
know.
we're good.
I think we're set. Yeah. Thanks for asking.
So I don't know if we want to approve the minutes that were sent out today. I don't know if anyone else got
I
them.
haven't seen them. I haven't got them.
Okay, I'll send them out. We will approve them at the next meeting.
Yeah, I didn't
Thank you for
rec-
doing those, by the way.
I didn't receive it.
They are relatively readable.
Roughly what time was it?
What, right now?
No, the meetings, the minutes. What time was that go out?
Maybe he sent out with
I
the
sent it out
meeting.
today, sometime around noonish. little before that.
Yes, did
Was
you
it-
send,
oh.
maybe with a meeting reminder?
I'm not
maybe
sure if
with
it
a
went,
text?
yeah, I'm not sure if it went just to
Yeah.
me, so I'll just.
Yeah,
send
I
it.
just sent it to you.
Okay.
Oh, that's fine.
I'll send it out to
Okay.
the group. I haven't had it.
I just, okay. I thought there was a technical glitch, but no, if it just went to him, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll send it out to
they'll
the
distribute.
For the database, all of y'all's emails, and I couldn't find it, and Trish didn't have it on her, so I just.
Yeah,
sent
that's
it to you.
fine. That's fine. We'll make sure you have the mailing list address, which reaches all of us all at once.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Feedback on the letters, right?
All right.
Yeah, if you have any questions or.
Next after that is subcommittee reports.
Sure. Do you do capital finance first?
Yep.
Sure. So this month we had a great guest, we had Paul Regan from the MBTA advisory board. He's, as I understand, has come the past few years, every now and again. So he usually comes in April to coincide with the operating budget review that they put together. When the MBTA does their fiscal budget, his group comes in as an advisory board on behalf of the cities and towns to take a look at the budget, get down to the documents. So he's got a pretty good view of what does go into the budget, and has a chance to ask some questions and really challenge some things there. So a few things we talked about with Paul. One, the fair revenue has kind of been increasing steadily as a percentage of total expenses. Obviously a good thing to get us less reliant on kind of outside support. You kind of think of the legislature needing to approve funding every year. Getting away from that is kind of a good thing. The other good thing that he sees is that the debt service ratio is falling. So less money is going each year to pay down debt. Kind of the past burden and more money for operations and things like that going forward, capital expenditures. Some of the other things we talked about were some of the recent pushes by the MBTA to outsource, and specifically what the MBTA had budgeted for outsourcing going forward. So I think that was specific to the bus maintenance program, where the MBTA had already put in a substantial savings from outsourcing. However, they are obviously still in the middle of that process and still far away from coming to a conclusion. So Paul was saying if they don't realize the savings, they're going to need to pick it up somewhere else. And also they're a little behind where they probably should be at this point. Another thing we talked about was the pension issue that's been going on lately. So for those of you who don't know, the issue there is that the MBTA has been putting money into a pension fund for the employees over time. Over time, that money has been invested, and over time, those investments have not lived up to the performance that folks kind of thought the investments would at the time the money was made and calculations were made. So right now, there's an unfunded position in the pension plan, and Paul's take, looking at the documents there, is that the MBTA is obligated, as a matter of contract, to make the payments that they've been making. And then that the pension fund is the one responsible for investing and kind of responsible for the shortfall. However, obviously there's political considerations for the MBTA. There's still MBTA employees at the end of the day. But there's the union on one side, MBTA on the other. We're going to come to a compromise going forward, because there's obviously promises that have been made to MBTA employees. And right now there's not a whole lot of funding to meet those promises. So that was a discussion with Paul. And anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just it still isn't clear to me who's responsible for that shortfall. I mean, I can understand politically why maybe in that the shortfall has to be made up by the state, and we're all state residents. I mean, it will be us. I mean, and so what entity that is, I mean, I guess in the end, doesn't really matter, except if it's going to come out of the MBTA operating budget, then it does matter, to the T. I mean, if they were taking the money and investing it, and then their investments didn't give the return that they expected, it's not the MBTA's fault. I mean, as long as the MBTA paid in the amount that they were supposed to pay. And I mean, you could make the argument that the expectations were unreasonable. I mean, like 7%, I mean, is optimistic. But I mean, right now, thinking is that it is the T's responsibility. So we don't make the call, and I don't know to what extent we want to get on the other side of that argument anyways, you know what I mean? So, but just from an intellectual.
What is the other side again?
The other side, by that meaning that we push the point that it's not the MBTA's responsibility.
Right.
To go, it's like the shortfall is like, well, go to the legislature for that, because I guess what the legislation could say is, well, that 187 million we're giving you a year, well, we'll take that, and fill that shortfall. So, but like, it's a thick issue, and I'm not sure what we can do about it. It's nice to kind of try to understand it, but certainly if the subcommittee or the full committee wants to, go down some direction on it, I'll follow, and contribute as much as I can.
Do you know what the expected shortfall is currently?
It's in one of the slide decks. It depends on the rate of return. So they gave you like various shortfalls based on 3, 5, 7% rate of return.
Yeah, so it would be interesting to know what this shortfall is relative to the total municipality shortfall. I think 90% of the municipalities in Massachusetts have not funded their promised employee pensions.
Yeah, I guess one thing there, so one distinction with the MBTA pension fund, it's putting money into a private trust.
Yeah.
So the MBTA doesn't have ownership over the assets. They have a seat at the table, they have seats on the board of the trust.
Right.
But that's distinct from municipality where they control the assets and they kind of control the returns. So they are a step back. So when we're talking about the shortfall and who's responsible, that's what that conversation stems from.
Yeah, I think very few municipalities actually do their own investment practice. So I think there are probably a lot of similar situations. But in the municipal case, and perhaps not this case, I think a lot of municipalities have simply underfunded. There was no real actuarially sound assumption that they were funding enough to make it with a rate of return. But I'm just pointing out that we have a very large statewide problem. Whatever basket it's in, it is extremely unlikely that our municipalities and the state as a whole are going to be able to meet their pension obligations. And at some point there will be a crisis.
I think with the T, it's different though. That what he was talking about, the private trust, they made some very bad investment decisions a couple of years ago. And it was a poor decision that instead of investing in some
right, but they might have made the wrong choice in who they gave the money to too. So.
What do you mean who they gave the money to?
Well, whoever was entrusted with making the return,
yeah, that doesn't really matter.
That may have been where the mistake was made.
Well, a mistake was made in the private thing, and if that's how it's run privately. They can also make some wonderful decisions because they're not constrained. So they could invest in Google like 20 years ago.
Right.
The other reason for thinking about this beyond just being an intellectual concern is that a lot of the decisions about how to fund various aspects of the operations is based on the issue of headcount. So when they want, for instance, a lot of outsourcing has to do with that because they can reduce headcount because they will say, well, this person fully funded, which takes into account their pension contribution, and then I guess perhaps the expected shortfall is X, and my thinking is that, well, if you deduct out from that X, the shortfall, or whatever you think, goes beyond what you contribute, then perhaps you won't be so adamant about not hiring people, or outsourcing. So that's more of a practical reason to be concerned about it.
So I'll follow up just a couple of things. So one, to your point, that the state issue, it's a nationwide issue.
Yeah.
I mean, we're dealing with promises made going back to the 50s and 60s,
right. No,
based on assumptions in population growth and so it's a nationwide problem. From the the trust perspective, I think the only thing we can truly push for in this committee is transparency and more information. So if we're not getting the information we need, or we don't think we have the transparency, it's on us if we're choosing, if we have the information, we're choosing not to review it. But if the other thing I would support is that, and you guys are closer to it, you've been looking at it, if you feel there's anything that there's a lack of transparency, I think this committee should write something formally saying we want further transparency. Because we can't say without a problem. Was it investment decisions, or is it a shortfall, or was it underfunded to begin with, or is it probably more likely a combination of both that's driving?
The T is met, it's contributed what it should have, so it's not a matter of the T not contributing.
Right. But it contributed what it should have. Contributing what it was obligated to doesn't mean that they set off on the right, that those obligations were set up under bad assumptions to begin with.
Yeah, I hear you. I guess you could always fund it at a zero rate of return, and we'll fund it.
No, but if it's saying,
I know, I'm making fun. Go ahead.
No.
I'm making fun.
But if they said all you have to do is contribute 5% and we're gonna and you'll be fine, if they made that decision in the 1970s, and they really should be contributing 10% or whatever the dollars amount were, the issue was is they should have contributed more starting 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
Just because they met the obligation doesn't mean that they were the right obligations.
Yeah.
So the percentage was agreed upon with the union.
Yep.
And to the extent that the union had control over the trust and potentially responsible for the investment thereof. So the T calculates percentage that they're going to put in every year.
Yeah.
And then the trust is supposed to invest those assets as they see fit because they're essentially controlled by the union. So that's that piece of it. But you're right, they could have had bad assumptions. They could have had bad agreement with the union from the beginning, or they didn't.
Yeah. It wasn't voiced upon them that rate of contribution. And so, the rate of contribution that was made to the pension, it wasn't, the team negotiated with them, but in the end, the union agreed to that negotiation, to that agreed amount.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And to the question about transparency, if we were to yell and scream about transparency, it would be just a minor voice in the outcries that there have been already for transparency. The Herald was the one that kind of started this a few years ago. So they've been really pushing for transparency. And for the longest, the T said it wasn't, not the T, the pension, whatever you call it, didn't want to do it. But I think the legislature got involved or somehow, and so they've cracked it. So there's been some light.
There's certainly political pressure from the legislature, but there's no legal obligation for the trust to disclose anything they don't want to, and that is a problem.
Right.
That if the T is going to be contributing money to this going forward, that they get control, they get oversight, and they get accountability from the investment.
Does the trust have a fiduciary obligation to the union members?
I would imagine
Yes.
they do.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the one thing I want to point out is the idea of a trust isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's a difference between how it was executed. There were good reasons to set it up with you, especially when you have multiple stakeholders, and you just want to say, okay, well, union, you have a say, MBTA, you have a say. It's the only way you're going to do it is to create a trust for the multiple parties to have say.
It's certainly unique. There's certainly not many other cases for it in state government.
But my feeling is always like, you can be as big as you want. It's just your responsibility. It's like, so don't come crying to us, as in the MBTA, when you don't have enough money. Cry to the state, yes, fine, and we as the state, will try to make you more whole, but I just don't want to see that money come out of the MBTA budget, operating budget exclusively. We might take a bit of a hit, as part of the hit that the whole state takes in order to make, its residents whole. But I would hate to see the whole shortfall come out of MBTA's operating budget, which is how we seem to be operating when we, refuse to hire more people, or we want to outsource stuff so that we can reduce the headcount so that we have less of a shortfall. That argument's a little extreme, But I think you get where I'm
Yeah.
going. And by extreme at this minute, I might be proportionally saying things disproportionate to to reality, but you have the sense of.
And I appreciate you guys looking into this too.
Two things. Is the presentation that you mentioned about the pension from the FMCB at the end of June, or was it something more recent that I couldn't find on the website anything more recent?
Several of them, so probably either the end of June, July, maybe.
Okay.
I would say, they was that?
You said it was a recurring issue, so.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm going to put the link to the specific PDF in the mailing list, but I couldn't find anything that was more recent than the last FMCB meeting in June.
That's probably it.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
And also about the bus privatization, you may have seen in the news at the Lynn Garage, there was pretty much the entire legislative contingent from the North Shore, well, from Lynn at least, both of our state reps and McGee and other people that I'm forgetting at that protest outside of the bus garage. I was just curious if anyone thinks that we want to engage with key legislators. I mean, it's, for the record, as you know, I live in Lynn. I know McGee a little bit. I know Brendan Crichton and Danny Cahill, who are the two state reps. I'll just put it out there. If nobody's chomping at the bit at this point, nothing to do then.
My goal is to get the real data behind why it is they think that it's going to work. I mean, as you know, we got ARIBA data from the bus people, so I'd like to get at least the numbers that went behind their calculations. And so, I mean, the slow push on that, is to, at the September 11th meeting, tell them we want to see their meeting stream so we can get their feedback questions. But along with that will be the argument that you should make more of the data available. I mean, we just don't want to see the slide deck. I mean, we need to see, the numbers that go into the calculations, behind these slide decks. Supposedly, there are consultants, that are doing research for them. Well, let's see how it is that you come to the conclusion, because if you're adding your numbers up wrong, well, there's a problem there. We need to see the numbers. So that's really where I'm coming from. But I hear you. I mean, if you in the group wants to write something, I'll proof it for you.
Okay. And we're talking about the September FMCB on the 11th?
Yeah.
Anyone planning on going? I'm not sure yet that I can go. Was anyone planning on it?
I'm planning on going and delivering the letter. So
great.
That'll come up in new business.
Okay. Thanks.
Can I ask a tiny Lynn question?
Yeah.
And related to us, are you expecting McGee to win the mayoral race, and who's going to replace McGee in the joint transportation?
At the moment, it's too early for me to have any expectations. I only have hopes.
I think he'll win, but that leaves a vacuum at the joint.
I think Tricia Bouvier, Farley Bouvier, said that she thinks it might be Senator Lewis. And he was the co-sponsor of the bill that she talked about with us at our meeting.
Okay.
At least I think if he were up for the gig, she would support him wholeheartedly. That was my take from that.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Senator Jason Lewis was the one that you mentioned last month.
I mean, I saw him at that last autonomous vehicle working meeting where they did the presentations. He seems, on the ball. But that was the first I'd seen of him. But that one impression of him was good.
But I mean, I would be shocked if Tom McGee, not shocked that if he wins the mayor race. I'd be shocked if, having won the mayor's race in the fall, he's not still tied into transportation issues. Maybe not statewide, but it's certainly like Boston area. I'd be surprised if he wasn't. That's just my opinion, of course.
Lynn is a big job.
Yeah.
I don't want to take us off track. Thank you.
All right. Marketing, Communications, and Operations Subcommittee.
Go for it.
All right. So we started off, we actually talked about a lot of different things, so I'll try to hit on the key ones. We talked about how the MBTA will continue with, or start the Foxborough commuter rail pilot, and also adding some trips to the 4 a.m. bus routes to support the demand that they're seeing there. Those will be year-long pilots. And one thing to note about the why we do pilots for 1 year is to really not lock the team to anything that they may not want to pursue after 1 year, because after 1 year kicks in, it's no longer considered temporary service. And then to get rid of that ad, you have to perform an equity analysis. So this just kind of makes sure that the teams get locked into anything long-standing. We talked about, for anyone who really wants to get into following this train around the APC on the commuter rail line, there's one train set, a 5-car double set that has the technology on it that tracks passengers getting on and off the train to get accurate counts, as opposed to conductors walking through and just doing manual counts. Rob Guptill said that he has not seen any data from that APC to date, so we're going to try to get a hold of someone from Railroad Ops to kind of speak to who's getting that data. Is that data being used for anything? Is there plans for that double set to be put on all lines? What's kind of the future of that technology in advance of the new fare collection system that will be rolled out within the next 3 years or so. We're talking about adding buses to routes to meet demand. Jonathan had a kind of rule of thumb note for us, Jonathan Belcher, that the garages typically like to have 20% spare buses at all times to either serve, if like say a red line car breaks down, need to transport passengers between stations. So where that can come into play is if you keep pulling out buses to add to routes and you lower that below 20%, that becomes an issue for operations, particularly in the winter, because the articulated buses can't run in snow conditions because just by their nature of being articulated, sometimes they can spin out and buckle. And then I asked Rob for if he had any updates on the T's current service plan to see where that was at. It's still very much in its infancy. One thing he pointed out to us that I don't think we talked about previously is that the FMCB had tasked the T with coming up with 3 potential tiers for the service plan. The first plan would be, the first tier would be a kind of a zero-sum game where if you could take some buses and add them to other routes to ease capacity issues, what would that look like? The second tier was if you brought all of the bus services up to the 90th percentile of the service delivery policy, what would be kind of the cost, what would that look like? And then the third tier would be like, what do we need to do to get all the bus routes designed in a manner and with enough bus capacity to handle all the people traveling, especially during peak times. What would that cost look like, and what would those routes look like? So that was kind of cool. So I'll keep pressing Rob on that because I think it's very interesting to see what changes are made to the bus network and what some of the costs would be associated with that. I don't know if you have anything on that or.
I think you covered it.
So just kind of thinking about the spare buses that they need. So you said they need to take 20% kind of on hold, and mostly thinking about if it doesn't seem so much if a bus breaks down, but more if the red line breaks down and they need that many. With us getting new red line cars in the future, and hopefully they have more reliability, do you see that number being able to come down at all, or is that something that?
Yeah, that's actually a follow-up question for Jonathan. I think the 20% kind of sounds like a general decision rule of thumb.
Okay.
I can't see a greater demand than when a rapid transit line breaks down in terms of what buses they need, especially depending on what distance it was, if there's medical emergency or weekend shuttle, stuff like that. Yeah, that'd be a good follow-up.
Yeah, it sounded like it was an industry policy number. It was unclear if it was an MBTA policy,
Right.
and it didn't sound like it was. And it also didn't sound that there was necessarily, because of that, it wasn't necessarily consistent across the garages. So like, you could have one garage manager who feels more comfortable with a higher ratio than another. We just didn't have it, we didn't get into the details on that, but they're good follow-ups to kind of say, is there room to push on that to lower the number of buses in reserve?
Yeah, I guess room to push, or even if it's up to the individual manager, I guess what are they using to make that decision?
Right. Are they going off their gut, or are they going off?
Are they using some sort of data there?
And one other thing with that is staffing buses. So there is apparently a shortage of bus drivers. And I don't remember if you said there was a hiring freeze currently, or just there's not enough bus drivers to keep adding trips to routes.
No, it's not a hiring freeze. I think it's actually related to the pension thing, that they were losing bus drivers. So it had something. It was a financial aspect.
Yeah.
It wasn't a freeze. It was like something about the compensation, that was causing the bus drivers to.
Yeah. So it's
some people who are. I think there's probably a mix of reasons why they're walking away, but he did specifically say that some old timers are afraid the pension's going to go away, so they're almost getting out earlier.
Okay. All right.
To try to get their piece before it goes.
Yeah, so even if, the rule of thumb is up to, say, 15% of buses should be on hold in each garage, there's nothing to say that we can actually get an operator to, for those 5% of buses and throw them on the route, so.
And with the passenger counters there, I guess one question I would have is if there could maybe use that in the future tied into ticket revenue. So if QLS is collecting, fares from 1,000 passengers on a route, but this thing is saying that, well, it was really 1,200 passengers on the route. I guess would they be able to in the future match those two up and say, QLS, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, we did mention that. It's like we want to see who's getting this data, what they're doing with it, and if that's something we could have as well. Because whenever we talk about commuter rail, it just seems like passenger counts were some random conductor on a random train from 2012. And those are the numbers that they stuff on. So it'd be good to see if there's a future to this technology, even if it's just for a 3-year plan.
Yeah. Also a comment. Apparently that train doesn't run on weekends because weekend ridership. But who knows? We don't want to know.
Well, no. Rob did say he saw it running at least on one Saturday. And I have an outstanding to-do item to mine my commuter rail data for that coach number in case it helps.
Yeah, it was coach
1818.
1818?
Yep.
So it's not really clear from that train that does the counts of whether they can really track whether people are paying what they should pay. Because I mean, with the facial or the entity recognition ability of it, I mean, you can track when someone gets on when they get off, but it's not clear to me that they are tracking how much they're paying.
Yeah,
so
literally, if you have a zone pass, you're flashing that to the conductor. There's no log of that.
Right.
Outside of you getting the pass sent to you and purchasing it.
Yeah, I mean, if we could do revenue verification with just video detection, we wouldn't need AFC 2.0 on commuter rail. But the AFC 2.0 project is going forward with commuter rail specifically outlined. Old business?
Old business, new business.
I'll pass these around as an element of old business. I got a bunch of the revised. You can pass them around. A bunch of the interestingly enlarged schedules. You may remember last month I passed around this little folded thing. Sorry if I'm skipping people again. Just pass it back and forth, and also this. That little folded schedule that I showed is essentially the same content as this, but why they went to 8.5 by 11, I think is maybe an interesting question. If they ran out of the small ones and printing more of the small ones was going to be too expensive, they just decided to go with a single fold 8.5 by 11. I don't know.
I can read this easily. I'll tell you that much.
Well,
the larger one cannot possibly be legal.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not larger print, and there's actually less information in terms of frequently asked questions on this 8.5 by 11 version. So, again, whether that's interesting enough to bring up in a discussion with Keolis people, I'll leave it to others to decide, but I wanted to at least share it with you guys. But also I only had 2 copies that I grabbed of the upcoming Lowell interruption schedule, which is weekend work for PTC. It's a pretty simplified handout, basically. Here's what the bus schedule is going to be.
Maybe they found that people weren't grabbing this moment.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Maybe they found that people weren't grabbing this moment. They don't grab your attention as you're walking by and you see this tiny little yellow thing. So this is a supplement to see, because okay, the details are a little harder to read up in here, but that grabs your attention. Like you can see that on the side, like, oh, I'll get there. All right, what is this big giant yellow thing? As opposed to
could be.
Yeah, so maybe it's part of the consultant's work. They recommended mixed media to get us.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, on the Beverly Drawbridge project itself, I'm still following online and by various sources how it went. There were a couple of glitches right after the bridge was done. There were a couple of incidents where it either was stuck, it was not interlocking properly, but apparently they had people there that scurried in and did it manually. And I'm going to give you another report maybe next month and say if it's really been solidly reliable or not.
All right. Any other old business, new business?
I was somewhat in a rush getting here, but I was driving to Chinatown Station to get there. There were tea ambassadors in red t-shirts. I saw them. Were you at Chinatown? Yeah. I don't know if anyone had seen them at other stations, but
I saw them on the news.
they were just saying hi. If I had more time, I would have stopped to see if that was a new program.
Well, you know the news story I'm talking about, huh?
No, I haven't seen the news.
No. So like a couple of them like beat up this homeless guy because he was a blind homeless guy who couldn't. He was like unable to pay his. He's like they thought he wasn't paying his fare. Oh man. So they like kicked his cane or something. It was nothing to do. It was not a pretty story. They ended up firing those guys.
I missed that one.
I think the messages are outsourced, right?
Yeah, they're outsourced.
They're outsourced.
Yeah, because I think the whole communications department, on the MBTA side has been, hence why. Never mind. I'm on camera like this.
No, it's not camera. It's just audio. I don't know.
All right.
Okay. Yep. No problem.
Never mind. I'll save it for.
Yeah, recording, but not
I'll save
video.
It's actually just part of Mass DOT's new fare avoidance deterrence policy. A bit of a physical enforcement.
For the record, he's being sarcastic, in case that doesn't translate on the recording.
So I was a few minutes late, and I came from Chinatown too, but while I was there, they did help a couple of people.
In theory, it's a good idea, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's better than the old little rooms you call them that the team was going to sit in and maybe knock on the window if you're a tourist and say, can I get
that by nature is not the most welcoming of sight.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between somebody walking around saying hi and somebody on their phone. It's glassed off, walled off, bulletproof kiosk.
Quick time check. Just so Arcadia to go. It's 6:48. Just a quick check. Who of the public would like to make a public comment at the end? Just so I have a sense of how much time to allot.
I'll just minute and a half.
Okay, I'll give you 3. But hold on, we'll come back to that in a little bit. I just wanted to cover another thing, or at least bring it up. This summer, I know we're still in summer and it's not over yet, but it seems like the reliability of air conditioning has been extremely good. I think this is the first summer where I personally, who ride a variation of commuter rail, red line, green line, orange line, bus, depending on what's happening that day, I personally have not been on a single vehicle across any of those modes that's had a dead air conditioning system. Not one this whole summer.
I would like to add that on Au Contraire, I've
Okay.
been on many buses where it's like 32 degrees, and I, thank God I bring along something to
Oh,
wear.
too cold,
Hey.
okay.
I was gonna say, it must be freezing because if he's comfortable, he likes the cold. So.
Well, I'm not talking about it not working at all. I mean,
No, no,
I haven't been on
I
anywhere it was
agree.
filled and hot.
But it's way, on
Yeah.
some of them, it's just way
Yeah.
too
It's also been a
cold.
relatively cool summer.
Yeah.
It has been a relatively cool summer,
But
but
you have a stress assist.
days like today, yeah, that's possible.
I have been on road redlining.
Oh, how are the
It's
PCCs
a-
doing?
The PCCs?
They're AC wise,
They're generally pretty good.
good.
Because that was all retrofitted on top of them, gosh, a decade ago. So it's not like it's main consistent.
No,
Okay.
no, I realize that, but
All right. Well, the other corollary to vehicle climate control is the in-station fans, and there used to be, correct me if I'm wrong, there used to be quite a large number of evaporative cooling units. Now, I don't mean like the fans that have a little thing in front that spits out water. Those are Mister fans or whatever. No, I mean there used to be these big rectangular boxes with a fan that would cool by the process of water evaporating and absorbing the heat. I haven't seen any of those out all summer long. I'm just wondering, have any of you
Where'd you
guys?
see those?
South Station, Park Street.
oh, by the way, on the red line, what are those? There are these big things in between the poles, all covered over, looks like it's.
Oh,
something-
I believe the new ad displays. At Harvard, they just replaced the old video screen, which was maybe 2 foot by 3 foot, with a triple screens bunched together that are each, I think, about 4 foot by 3. So not only have they increased the size of each screen, they've gone from a single screen to 3. It's tremendous. I think that's what it's at Park Street, but again,
It's tremendous that you're going to have more ads during your place.
well, I personally thought it was a good balance between MBTA, customer service campaign information, upcoming event information, ads, yes. They had weather forecasts at one point. I thought it was a good balance personally, but anyway, has anybody seen those evaporative coolers? I'm really curious if that
I will
was,
look at South Station this evening.
yeah.
They could be there and I can miss them, so. But
Such a new business. I thought Park County was going to cover it. So he's taking the lead on the new members, the interview process. So my assumption is that he has contacted people. I'm backing it up. I was tasked with getting some space and time for us. So I was able to get, thanks to Kyle and Trish, this room and or that room be on the last 2 Thursdays of the month from 5 to 7. We have about 24 applicants. And so that's not going to be enough time for all of them, because in the past we've done 20 to 25 minute interviews.
Yep.
So for 2 hours we'll interview 4 people tandemly, and that may not sound like a lot of time, but after 2 hours you're kind of
Oh, I agree. Yeah, 2 hours max.
And so that would give us a chance to go through 8. So we'll probably need to schedule 2 or 3 more sessions after that, and so I can see us running through September and October and maybe early November, wrapping things up around Thanksgiving, and then bring people in for January. Go ahead.
I'm just curious if, or what you would think, what other people would think about, say, for example, and I'm not just saying that I'm for this or against it, just putting out the idea. If we have 24 applications and we have so many vacancies, is there any value, do you think, to prioritizing the interview list based on the quality of application, take the people that look the best first, and then say after the first 8 interviews, take 4 of the best interviews out of the first 8 and just say, welcome to the Rock, and then proceed with another round of 8 interviews, take the best.
Have you looked at the applications?
I'm sorry?
Have you looked at them?
I couldn't find the Google, I was gonna ask if somebody could send the link. I searched and searched, I couldn't find them.
They're all very good.
Yep.
I'm really impressed with the poll this time. There's only
Yep.
one that I have some hesitancy about, and that's only because I think that person would be better served being a part of ACT. And it's such a hard call, I feel.
Yeah. My only, sorry.
That's why you've seen everyone,
I mean, I think it's a decent idea. I haven't seen the applications either. If you're saying they're all very similar, then there's not a value, but if there is some separation there, I don't think it's the worst idea to try to narrow it down and focus the time, and even maybe do it in waves.
Yeah.
We don't need to get the...
But the point is, if we're going to interview them all, I mean, unless you're saying that you don't want to interview them all.
No, I'd like to.
I don't really see, so what, we bring one set in a month earlier than the rest? I mean, there's little value in that.
Not sure. I mean,
it comes down to the decision: do you want to interview them all or not? If you're not going to interview them all, then you should screen and pick the 12 you want to interview. If you guys want to spend all the time to interview them all,
Yeah.
go for it.
What slots we're looking at? Trying to fill?
is our goal 15?
I would say our short-term goals with 15 was our so that I'm not sure how many spots I leave right now. These are 7 or 8 spots, and I just have to count them up. But then we have a ceiling of 21.
Yeah. My concern in raising that potential for accepting people only after or even after a small number of interviews. My concern is just waiting until January to have everyone start. Just seems like we're in the end of August, so another 5.5 months until anyone new comes on board.
They can still come to the meetings. We can suggest they come to the meetings.
I agree.
It's not high.
But that starts to set an assumption that
Or encourage them to come like Barry comes all the time.
I know, but that kind of it lays the assumption that you're don't worry, you just got to get through this process. And I don't want to. I mean, how awful would it be if we say come to all the meetings and then we say sorry, you haven't been selected.
So there is another way if there are a few people of this group that want to scan them and then just compare notes.
Mm-hmm.
But it largely hinges, in my limited experience, on whether you see a tilt in the candidates. If you see an obvious tilt, then it kind of makes sense to triage them. But if you don't see an obvious tilt, then it doesn't help.
Yeah. Well, the other alternative is, would we perhaps be able to do like phone interviews? As opposed to the limited access to be here physically, limited access to the rooms, perhaps like a phone interview between multiple people on a conference line.
I like to see it interact.
Okay. Again, I'm just putting ideas out. I'll go along with whatever we decide as a group.
Mr. Acting Co-Chair, I'm going to do a time check on.
Yep, I was watching the time. It's 3 of.
Barry.
You want to give us your? I'm kidding. About a minute and a half. You can take 3 minutes if you want.
Barry Steinberg, Association for Public Transportation. Just going to give you a fast report on Quincy. The contractor was given a go-ahead on the end of June to work on Wallaston and Quincy. And the last I heard was that they were going to be starting as late as the 1st of November. Why it takes so long to get organized, I don't know, but Wallaston is going to be closed for approximately 2 years. Quincy, they're going to be doing initially destruction before they're doing construction.
Is that the parking garage?
Yes, if you look at the T website, actually the T website has gotten successively more informative about projects as opposed to just giving you a handout basically. But the top 3 stories of the garage is going to be torn down.
Is that at North Quincy or Quincy
That's
Center?
Quincy Center Station.
Oh, that's my station.
North Quincy, they're going to be doing private investment where the surface parking is now, and they're going to be, and they continue to do work at Braintree and Quincy Adams. So basically, the entire South Shore version of the Red Line is having continuing turmoil.
Yep. I'm sending the link out to the group for the project PDF, and we'll follow it, rest assured. One speculation of why it might not be starting until fall might have to do with the ratings for the bus operators.
Well, one thing at the most recent meeting they had, they said the buses would be the private buses.
Entirely. Oh.
Yes.
We'll definitely follow up on
that would
that.
be supplied by the contractor. That's number one. Now, they made a comment that there would be additional bus service on the existing T routes, more intensive, but not without expanding the span of service. Now, the next rating should be starting very soon. And
Labor Day weekend.
And when they at the meeting, I know the T inspector, and he said he didn't know anything about this. So this may be the project engineers blasting off without knowing anything.
We'll take this up in our subcommittee. Thank you very much.
We can ask Jonathan, I'm sure he'll know.
Thank you, Barry. I've got 7:01, unless there's any final things. Can I have a motion to adjourn? And a second?
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. See you next month, if not sooner.
So, Barry, capital and operating.
So if you get rich off this one.
Yeah, about 95% return so far.
Excellent.
It's
That's
actually a
all.
good
If
idea.
you want it late, then you should add like that 10 back.
Some operating.
And,
10,000% return?
well, it's gonna be 9,000.
Look,
So when you buy it, it's gonna be
No, I
earlier this
did
year.
look into, not just a big one, there's a bunch of other ones, about 8 different
Oh,
ones.
so you got a basket.
I've got a basket, some are about 350% return, some are maybe as low as 30.
So,
But one of the most exciting about Monero, check it out.
Monero?
Monero.
Monero?
XMR symbol.
So where do you buy your basket?
Huh?
Where do you buy your basket?
There's different ones, different exchanges, Bitfinex, Bitrex, Kraken, there's a bunch of really good exchanges.
Yeah, right.
That's a big
But it
surplus
is
with
coming
that
out.
problem. Yeah, but they
Yeah.
You too. Cool. Thank you.
Not a problem.
like this business of the kids and buses.
So,
I gotta figure out how to stop this stream.
so why, was there a problem getting video?
Well,
Yeah, the camera wouldn't show up in the app,
I see, okay.
but
Are you
I'll,
following James's instructions, or are you doing something else?
I am. Yeah, he was using a Windows machine, but the audio worked right, and I recorded it, so, you know, so from the first one,
Cool.
not having it, to this one, audio.
Excellent.
Oh, and besides the stream, I recorded on this too, I remember to bring that.
I was,
And next time we'll have video.
looking into doing it with
I
the
enjoyed
cell
the
phone
port
via
tool.
like Google Hangouts, I mean, maybe we'll just have a competing way of doing it.
Yep.
And